Tom, why must you test my faith in the one true king? Following on from our Red Wedding video, Tom thought it might be fun to also have a wee look at Blackwater and apply the same lens. Was it military magnificence or a massive miscalculation? Before we begin though, we want to give out a special shout out to the White Sox #1 fan, Tobby the Warlord of New England, who has basically become the official historical consultant for our channel. What's that, Tobby? When do you get paid? No, you misunderstand. You're officially an intern. Take another look at your contract. No financial remuneration until Wins is released. So, might want to pull up a chair. Anyway, workers' rights abuses set aside, let's begin by taking stock of the forces involved, their positions, overall state, and what that tells us of both sides. Starting with manpower and naval resources. Here's what both sides brought to the table. Tyrion, Tyrion, here's what he has, little Tyrion, to fight against the Mannis, love you, Mannis. Let's move on. Looking at these numbers on paper, we start to see why Tyrion believed himself to be in deep doo-doo, and why Stannis was confident of victory. Tom, why don't you start by telling us why the Half-Man's army sucks balls?
Well, Tyrion's army isn't really much of an army. The Gold Cloaks are basically a police force, and that's only the most professional ones, not the barely trained starving newbies Cersei recruits to swell the numbers. They've got some martial training, but dealing with drunken miscreants, petty criminals, and minor civil unrest is their day-to-day. The 800 sellswords are handy, and the only solid force, that being the 300 knights and squires, are kind of piss in the sea in a huge battle. Tywin sent Tyrion to King's Landing to show up the politics and rule. If he had spared some military personnel, such as Adam Marbrand, this may have lessened the burden on Tyrion's shoulders. Giving Tyrion 500 or maybe 1,000 more men with capable officers allows Tyrion to rein in the Boy King more and have a more concrete grip on the military forces in King's Landing.
Bah! You call that an army, Tom? This is an army! Stannis' force is an actual war machine military, with the bulk of the forces consisting of men who are well drilled for this type of conflict. It's akin to asking a local police force with a few military advisors to go head-to-head with a professional army that has some SAS units at the spearhead. They'll do better than a bunch of civvies thanks to their training and experience, and they do have the defensive advantage of the city walls, we can't ignore that, but they are still woefully out of their depth. Then there's the navies. Don't get me started on those big, beautiful ships Stannis has. Tyrion has a decent number of quote-unquote combat-viable vessels at his disposal, I suppose, but Stannis has effectively double the warships and 4 times the ships in general. Enough said.
Flat numbers aren't always the full story though, are they, Liam?
Ah, that is true, my friend. Why don't you tell them about the DNA?
In warfare, there is a principle known as the defender's natural advantage. Any force that's embedded in a defensible position usually has the advantage over the ones that are attacking. As a general rule of thumb, it's often said the attackers need a 3-to-1 numbers advantage to override the defender's natural advantage, be that in an open field or a limited position such as a castle or a keep. But Stannis is attacking a huge fortified city, and in that case, the defender's natural advantage actually would start to increase in favour of the Lannisters, due to the sheer size of the place and the limitations Stannis has in being on the wrong side of the Blackwater.
Looks to me like you're on the wrong side of the river!
With the defender's natural advantage helping to even things out, that initial stink of manure is starting to give way to a smell of roses for our little Lannister, and the Tyrells haven't even rocked up yet.
But Tom, military experts will tell you war is fluid and the defender's natural advantage is affected by other dynamics. The quality of troops, where you concentrate force, how defender and attacker leverage the terrain, commander skill, specificity of objective, and other unique circumstances will drastically influence this principle. And I think there's some important situation-specific context to address here that you are forgetting that detriments Tyrion's defensive advantage. Stannis is the former master of ships. He's spent a lot of time in King's Landing and knows it extremely well, which means he knows where it's strong and where it's nice and soft. But even that's not the worst of it for the Little Lion. The city has been suffering food shortages, enough to cause the inhabitants to riot and almost rip that abomination you call a king to pieces. So close. When it comes to morale and civil unrest, King's Landing isn't a powder keg ready to explode. It's a lidless jar of wildfire with an open flame being dangled over it.
I view those as rather inconvenient circumstances. We can't dunk on Tyrion for this though. King's Landing, in a positional sense, is surrounded and reliant on too many areas to feed it, and with the blockade of the Rose Road, he's up shit creek without a paddle. Before we continue, don't forget to like, hype and subscribe, and if you like Star Wars, check out our Star Wars channel in the description below.
Wait, Tom, I'm still not done handing out L's to our favorite little Lannister. Stannis has in his forces something that Tyrion doesn't: a reliable chain of command. Stannis' officers carry out his plan even when not being led directly by the one true king, allowing him to coordinate the whole effort from the rear, giving him the ability to command with the whole picture rather than one specific piece of the canvas. This also gives Stannis a much stronger avenue of escape if things go pear-shaped and reduces the danger he's in. This may seem cowardly, but it's actually important to highlight as a positive because the War of the Five Kings has multiple examples of the leader being undone by reckless bravado and they're personally taking the field. Stannis is one of the few who fights and runs away, but gets to fight another day. Tyrion, by contrast, doesn't have the same luxury and is surrounded by incompetence, bar a choice few, meaning he has to put out practically every fire personally, which was a big contributor in the city's defenses falling apart.
Alright, are you finished yet?
No, actually, I still have...
Great, now let's take a look at both sides' overall strategy. We've got to be fair to Tyrion here, he's not deluded in the slightest. He knows he's been dealt a bad hand and that the dealer, just to be a real Balon, has smeared his cards and shit. He knows he's going head to head with one of the most formidable military commanders alive, but then to compound this, he's also butting heads with his own faction and having to mitigate their ineptitude with only Bronn, Jacelyn Bywater and Varys as worthwhile advisors, since the Kingsguard are in Cersei's pockets and may not follow his commands to the fullest if she or even Joffrey contradicts them. Tyrion isn't planning to destroy or even rout Stannis' army, all he can do is resist and stall it out, and that's exactly what he sets out to do. Hamper the usurper as much as possible. This can be done by inflicting as much damage and reducing Stannis' ability to cross the Blackwater rush, hopefully softening up his army to ensure the success of his father's relief force, which is hopefully coming. Was this the right decision for Tyrion? Yes, abso-fucking-lutely. There is literally nothing else he can do with what he's got.
And that's just for starters. By the Lord of Light, Tom, if you do not unmute me, I'll... Hello there. Stannis, on the other hand, had two options: siege or assault. These two methods often get conflated as the same thing, but they are two very different approaches. But just to catch that guy, yes,
all assaults on a fortification are technically sieges.
But not all sieges are assaults. Okay, that guy? Good. Stannis can either surround and blockade the city further to try and starve the defenders out, or squeeze the civilians hard enough to hand over the incest goblin and his fam, which, to be honest, probably wouldn't take that long, seeing as how the small folk fucking hate the Lannisters' guts, or he can directly attack the city and try to brute force his way in. Stannis opts for the latter, and the question we've got to ask is, was it the right call? Yes. Yes, it was. Stannis is in a race against time here. Hitting the city hard and fast while it's at its most vulnerable gives him the best odds of successfully taking it and holding it. Digging in for a traditional siege would have meant allowing Tywin more time to relieve it. This was how most medieval sieges were won or lost. It was rare for the defenders to repel a siege alone. Either your allies showed up, or you often ended up tossing in the towel. A traditional siege would have also given Tyrion more time to shore up the weaker sections of the fortifications in the event Stannis did have to resort to an assault. With no concrete knowledge of where Tywin's host is, Stannis is already taking a calculated risk that Tywin cannot get to him in time from the Riverlands. Taking the city as quickly as possible was the best course of action. Stannis is likely banking on everyone expecting him to be stuck besieging Storm's End for months, and considering he himself held it for a year, that's a reasonable assumption. But because he breezed through the siege of Storm's End quickly, because he's the fucking menace,
No cheating, promise.
he can turn his attention to King's Landing almost immediately and catch the lions without their pants fully pulled up. Militarily, it's the perfect time to strike.
Okay, so far neither side has really made a mistake or shown an error in judgment.
Apart from Tyrion, of course, not just bowing down and giving the one true king what is his by right. Tom! Massive fucking mistake.
Both sides have made the best plays they can with the hands they've been dealt, so let's really start picking this battle apart and look at specific tactics and actions each side takes.
Do bear in mind that we're judging these actions and tactics through the eyes of both commanders being unaware that the wildcard faction has taken a side. Because it's not fair to criticize either faction's tactics based on reader hindsight. So, starting with the Lions then. Tom?
Pretty much all of Tyrion's plays are delaying actions rather than securing objectives, essentially search and destroy and tar pit tactics. For the pre-game, Tyrion makes measures to deny Stannis any easy landings. He sinks ships at various keys to make docking there problematic and may even damage and sink enemy ships. And he also burns down houses immediately outside the walls to deny any helping hand to Stannis' men, potentially using them to scale the walls. Tyrion only thinks his father is coming. Tywin has whatever's left of his 20,000 heroes after getting the shit kicked out of him at the fords. Stannis, even post-Nukin, has at least 16,500 heavy cavalry with him. Taking into account the rep and skill of the commanders, that's a battle Stannis can win if he knows it's coming. Which leads us to the first move of the actual battle itself, which is Tyrion's excellent use of his unorthodox force, the Mountain Clans. Tyrion sends these guys into the Kingswood and tasks them with killing scouts and harassing any of Stannis' forces they encounter. This arguably fucked over Stannis more than anything else, including the fireworks. The clansman was tasked with just harassing Stannis' march and not to openly engage. Ambushing and raiding his baggage trains and killing scouts was their prime directives, and they executed it to perfection. This causes issues for Stannis because they are not openly engaging and it's hard to guess their numbers. Their biggest contribution is blinding Stannis by depriving him of his scouts. Stannis' army still makes it to King's Landing in good order, it's his navy that delays the attack. The clansmen though obliterated any notion of Stannis consolidating and repositioning to effectively engage Tywin's relief force if it showed up in a fit state to fight. Getting the mountain clans out of the city was also just practical. They had no experience with siege warfare and may have possibly been a liability. Placing them somewhere more familiar to them and letting them fight in their usual modus operandi was generally inspired.
What about that overrated wildfire trick, Tom?
I was just about to get to that. How do you do Blackwater without talking about the wildfire? A little thing people often leave out when discussing this tactic is it's actually Cersei's idea. Tyrion merely improves on it by placing it in boats on the water and using a big chain to trap Stannis' fleet in the rush. Tyrion still does employ Spitfires to launch small pots of wildfire after having men specifically trained for it. Compare that to what we assume Cersei's plan was, of just launching huge jars of it from the walls and catapults. Jesus. With hindsight and knowledge of the Tyrell's intervention, this can be credited as the move that hampered Stannis just enough for the Lions to win the battle. Tyrion was relying heavily on this play and most of his eggs were in this basket. And while it doesn't fully work out, Tyrion does deal Stannis a massive fucking blow. The river being on fire by itself buys valuable time and would have undeniably fucked with the morale of Stannis' men. But it's not wholly successful. 8 ships get men ashore to start attacking the city, causing Tyrion a headache. And by Tyrion's own estimates, Stannis is left with more than enough ships to get his army across in a timely manner once the fires have died down and the sailors had regained their courage. Another factor overlooked with this tactic was the risk and the cost. Tyrion destroys most of his own fleet in this action. That can't have been good for the defenders' morale, bunch of wusses, but not to mention it robs the Lions of any means of defending the water once the fires die down. This is an all or nothing desperation tactic, and using it as your opening move sets the tone of the battle. After this, we have Tyrion's idea of sending out sorties to harass and engage anyone who makes it to shore and give them the good news. To put it bluntly, Tyrion's sorties do work. If it's Stannis' entire army on the beach, maybe a bad idea. But it's not. For now, it's the remains of the initial landing force. What does become an issue is Tyrion having to put himself in a position of danger to lead them, because there's no one else to rally or inspire them. Tyrion needed to understand how important his safety was to the morale of the army, which is already teetering, and putting himself in the line of fire like he does on the improvised bridge is foolhardy. Initially though, Tyrion is cleaning house. He stops the battering ram at the King's Gate, then starts up the meat grinder on the beaches and the streets. It's all working perfectly, and with the plan being to sweep round to the Mudgate and clear the enemy there, perfect. The sorties are working despite taking heavy casualties, but you gotta crack a couple of eggs to make an omelette. If Tyrion is able to kill them at the beaches and stop them establishing any footholds, and even burn more ships in the process, he deprives Stannis of a position and an important resource that's going to be even more important after the wildfire ploy. Wonderful work from the Halfman. Come on, let's hear it. Halfman, Halfman, Halfman!
Haha! I figured out the unmute button! Yeah, I'm sorry, Tom. I know this is your section, but I want to offer a different perspective on this tactic specifically, and that is the sorties are a really dumb idea. Sending out a sortie from a fortification should never be an opening move when you're so vastly outnumbered, even if you've got the Hound. I'm not a medieval warfare expert, but from most of my research, it seems this is something you do as your last-ditch effort, or when the attackers have exposed a critical weakness. I get Tyrion and Tom's thought process, shock and awe and stem the tide of oncoming forces, but ultimately it's a waste of men he desperately cannot afford to lose. Walls, gatehouses, and gates are defensive multipliers. They all provide defensible bottlenecks to funnel a numerically superior force into a space that mitigates a numbers advantage. And walls and gatehouses in particular provide elevation that allows you to throw heavy or hot things on the attackers with a lessened risk of reprisal. So why would you sally out and meet the enemy on equal ground? It's a very short-sighted play on Tyrion's part. Like Tom, I can acknowledge he sees initial success at repelling the attackers, sure. But what about when the enemy pushes him back to the walls? Which, by the way, in story they do. He now has less strength to defend them, and here he could have gotten a much better ratio for traded blood. It's a short-term gain and long-term pain if the battle drags on. And before anyone mentions the battering rams, there is a far more effective way of hindering them, and it doesn't cost blood.
You should be digging ditches, many ditches. Once your first ditch is ready, build another one.
It's a tried and tested way to fuck with siege engines. Tyrion had time to build chains, oversee the mass production of wildfire, and fill ships with it. Far as I'm concerned, no excuse, half-man. You should have grabbed your fucking shovel.
Whatever, man. I'll listen to you about defending a castle after you listen to me how to sail your fleet up the Blackwater.
Ouch! Shots fired, Tom. Fuck!
Next, we have to look at Joffrey's inspired battle-crucial tactic of firing the antler men at Stannis' army. The best thing you can argue this did is to put known traitors on the other side of the war and placated Joffrey briefly, allowing Tyrion to focus on other important matters. But other than that, it did fuck all but waste trebuchet space, which was really causing some problems to Stannis' fleet. And since some of these men owed large sums of money to the crown, it also hurt the king's pockets. Joffrey literally was throwing money away. I'm not sure Stannis or his men lost any sleep over this, and it's kind of exposing the king as a little bit of a sadistic shit, which in turn might make some of the defenders more prone to turning on him if the battle starts tipping the other way. For Tyrion though, you could argue this is the equivalent of letting your younger brother play video games with you whilst you've unplugged his controller. It keeps them busy whilst you handle the real work, so not a total waste. And before we move on to the usurper,
Oh, it's like that, is it, Tom? Know that it is only by the grace of our long-standing friendship I don't throw you on the fires for such treasonous words!
stop interrupting me and wait your turn. Right, the lion's worst move, and actually, no, I think I'm happy for you to start talking now, Liam.
Oh, no, I'm good, my friend. Please continue. You were talking about the lion's biggest moment of dumbassery?
Recalling Joffrey to the Red Keep. With no Tyrell intervention, this is game over. It utterly destroys whatever morale is left in the defenders, and they straight up bolt from their posts, and to add salt to the wounds, they kill anyone who tries to rally them. You can't blame this one entirely on Tyrion. He understood full well what it meant to morale to have the king appear to be in the thick of it, and he did his best to ensure Joffrey remained visible and safe until other issues took his attention away. This just emphasizes how thin the bench was, that after Tyrion the Half-Man shamed his troops into fighting by leading the charge, there was no one else left who commanded that same respect back at the wall.
So, some unorthodox tricks, one of which would most certainly be classified as a war crime to most people, like father like son, eh? But what about the side that isn't propping up a sociopathic incest goblin for its king? The fucking Manus! What tactics does he employ? Just a little disclaimer here, guys. We don't get any POV from Stannis' side of the battle, so we can't say with certainty what he did and did not order, and what were instances of his men just taking the initiative. But because Stannis is known for his command skills, we are going to assume most of the actions carried out by his men were them executing his specific pre-given orders to some degree. Stannis' tactics are less about tar pitting and search and destroy, and more about securing specific positions. His main objective is to secure the Blackwater rush with his fleet and then attack from the river. His army, due to its starting location, approaches King's Landing on the wrong side of the rush, and the only ways to get a sizable force across it would either be ferrying them with ships and hastily knocked up rafts made from the trees of the Kingswood, or march about 200 miles west to cross the large bridge on the Gold Road. Remember, Stannis is looking for a quick knockout strike, not a drawn-out ordeal. He needs to get into the city ASAP and keep the defenses intact enough so that he can use them against any relief effort. Marching across the Gold Road Bridge is going to take more time, provides a solid opportunity for interception, not to mention the land-adjacent parts of King's Landing are where it's most fortified, for obvious reasons. And there is another concern most don't consider, and that is, if the Manus kicks in these doors for himself, he's also kicked them in for a relief army if they show up before he can repair the damage. People often criticize Stannis for attacking from the river, not really realizing how it provides the one true king with several big picture advantages. 1. It allows him to hit the weakest part of the city's defenses, whilst also breaching at a point of ingress he can plug with his war fleet and has terrain that provides a bottleneck to land forces. 2. It puts him close to his main objective, that being the Red Keep. Getting into the city is important, but it's not a total victory till you've taken the castle and this prick's head. And this needs doing pronto, and not just because I hate him. 3. It allows him to bypass the majority of population centres, reducing the chance of civilian resistance, whilst also keeping the defences of the land-adjacent parts of the city intact. In the big picture, it's quite possibly the wisest play Stannis could have made regarding the battle. The issue, of course, is the wildfire from that dirty, cheating little fucker! It destroys 4/5 of his fleet and sets the river ablaze, making any immediate crossing a risky proposition for the remaining ships. So, with his initial tactic thwarted, how does Stannis respond? Per Stannis' orders, they attack the Mud Gate. This is the priority target for Stannis to breach. It's the weakest gate, and it puts him closest to the Red Keep. But the might of the Manus doesn't stop there. Likely knowing the defenders will focus most of their efforts on the Mud Gate, he either tasked another portion of his force to hit the King's Gate on the other side of the city that's facing the river, or his officers had the initiative to employ a pre-planned contingency. This functions as a bog-standard diversionary tactic. Nothing fancy at all, but it achieves the desired effect and more. It pulls Tyrion and a chunk of his forces away from the Mud Gate and allows it to come under a more focused attack. And while I can't say this was Stannis' intention, this play is what causes Cersei to panic and recall Joffrey, which leads to the mutiny of most of the Gold Cloaks and the murder of Commander Bywater, which is basically the curtains moment for the defenders. So unintended bonus point. But it doesn't stop there either, because when life hands Stannis lemons, he sacrifices them to the Lord of Light in exchange for a fiery boat bridge that his bravest knights are willing to cross for him. I don't think you can understate the effect this would have had on the defenders' morale. The river's on fire, and the fuckers are still coming. Ours is the fury! And again, while you cannot say this is the Manus' master plan, this bridge causes Tyrion to panic and rashly sally out to meet those crossing. Again, drawing the primary commander away from where he's truly needed and almost getting him killed. Another unintended bonus point. Honestly, Stannis doesn't do anything particularly remarkable, but you do see with his initial plan and the actions of his men why he is held in such high esteem as a military commander. There is an interesting contrast in Tyrion and Stannis, in that one was forsaking traditional military wisdom and tactics in favor of the unorthodox, and the other was playing it pretty by the book. But this battle shows why that book was published in the first place. Despite the biggest middle finger imaginable, the Manus has the city on the ropes after only half a day or so of fighting. On his first attempt. So, with all these factors weighed up, did either side fuck up? Could they have done anything better when it comes to the battle tactics specifically? Starting with Tyrion and the Lions. Tom, the floor is yours, my friend.
Okay, some of Tyrion's moves are desperation tactics, but what can you really expect when he's in a desperate situation? Well, Wildfire and Chain Trick was extremely risky, but it had to be tried. Tyrion simply did not have the men to hold the city if Stannis had free run of the Blackwater. But he did have some fantastic unintended consequences though. But leaving Joffrey unattended when you're the only one with the authority to override Cersei's orders was not a wise move. Though Tyrion is damned if he does and damned if he doesn't, the King's Gate wasn't looking great. I see why you get excited over that now. But yes, the King's Gate did need to be secured, hence sallying out. If it had broken, then that could have led to Joffrey's capture or worse. But this is a flaw in Tyrion's character. He finally gets the adoration he's been seeking his entire life. Men are cheering his name and following him. He now knows what it's like to be Jaime. He's overcome the battle fever and sallies forth when he could have just retreated back in once that gate was secured and kept in a safe position. He rallied the men, he cleared the gate, now get back inside! What about Stannis though? Could he have done anything better in the battle?
That sounds rather treasonous to me, buddy.
In a holistic sense, not really. Stannis' plan overall was sound, and that's demonstrated via the fact he took the equivalent of a nuke point blank to his face and still had the city on the verge of falling. He seemed to adapt quite smoothly to whatever Tyrion threw at him. That being said, the Manus could have done one thing better, and that's whom he puts in charge of his fleet. Whether it's a rare instance of nepotism, or Stannis simply not caring, because from where he was standing, his advantage was such that even a trained monkey could pull it off, or him actually having been a half-decent naval commander, Imri was not the right man for the job. He plays a huge role in the battle. A bit good, but mainly bad. Sure, he predicts there may be some wildfire shenanigans in play, just not quite to the extent Tyrion had in mind. And you can even argue his dispersing of the ships into rows of 20 was beneficial for combating the rush's current with oars, and the spacing making it a little harder for Spitfires to hit their marks. And he does leave a strong rearguard in our favourite pirate. But after that, well, filled with overconfidence, he rushes to catch up with Stannis' land army after being waylaid by poor conditions rather than staying frosty. His forcing Salador and his brethren to form a rearguard is definitely mostly motivated by glory hogging and highborn prejudice, and in keeping with that prejudice, he also tells Davos, a man who knows King's Landing intimately, to go and do one when Sir Chados of the Onions suggests scouting ahead. Despite Davos' concerns being further reinforced by captured fishermen who inform Imri of the totally not at all suspicious chain. That alone should have been enough to warrant holding back a full commitment. Rash, Imri. Too rash. Could Stannis have chosen someone different to lead the fleet like Davos? Maybe. Would those on the boats have followed that person? We can't say for certain. The only thing we can say is the best man for the job, who would have seen it done properly, the Manus himself, could not have taken this command. He needed to remain with the land army. You see, the fleet belonged to Stannis, so their loyalty isn't in question. The land army, though? Well, considering most of them declared for Renly, I've got no legitimate claim whatsoever, but I'm better than Stannis, trust me bro Baratheon, over the legal heir. Not so much. Stannis kind of needed to remain with these guys as a figurehead to ensure they held true to their cause. Blackwater is a lesson for Stannis, and that lesson is, just because you're level-headed, don't assume everyone under you is. His fleet and his army are filled with overconfidence and blue-balled for battle. They want it, but are not quite taking it seriously enough. Davos notes that a lot of the captains are dressed in shiny heavy armor as if this is a parade of strength. They're underestimating the enemy and referring to him as a boy and his fleet as toys, evidencing they see it as somewhat of a fun game rather than a real battle. If Imri had not been... one second... that fool of a Florent who sailed my fleet into the jaws of a trap and spared more ships from the fire by employing more caution, Stannis may have had a better exit strategy or even changed the approach of attack. With a larger portion of the fleet on the opposite side of the chain, they could have possibly ferried men to the northern side of King's Landing and really stretched out Tyrion's forces. We already saw how effective the battering ram at the King's Gate was. Imagine that on the other side of the city.
You'd have been fucked, dwarf.
But what's done is done, so back to the initial question. Blackwater, military magnificence or destined for doom?
For Tyrion, not really either. He didn't really have a choice. It was fight, die, or abandon his family. which actually would have been a better idea. He threw some good punches, and sure, there was areas he could have done better, but ultimately he had no choice in this. To say he's not an experienced military leader, he gives it an extremely admirable effort. But it can't be ignored that it's only with the reader-informed hindsight of the Tyrell intervention that we see his tactics and tricks as elements that helped win the battle. When observed in the moment, these tactics were good, but ultimately he was undermined by his own family and the city was about to fall because of it. What about you over there?
For Stannis, as a battle, militarily, I wouldn't call this a military masterstroke by any stretch. Stannis doesn't really do anything clever or ballsy like Robb's efforts in this same war, but it's a damn fine display of good planning and adaptation in the face of unpredictable setbacks. It should be reinforced Stannis would have won were it not for the Tyrells showing up to the party. Now you're probably noticing I keep leaving Tywin out of these intervention statements, and that's not because we're trying to snub him, it's because we want to address the possibility of just Tywin riding to the rescue. Could Tywin's force alone have changed the Lion's fortunes? Me, Tom, and Tobby are of the opinion Tywin alone likely could have put the kibosh on Stannis' attack. If he can make it in time. If his host is intact enough and is in a fit enough state to fight, or at least looks like it is. And if he plays his cards right. Tywin's best play if he's alone would be not to engage Stannis' army or trying to hit it in the flank, even with the element of surprise Tyrion's clansmen have brought him. Without the Tyrells there to provide overwhelming force, this is very dicey for reasons I'll address soon. But simply, he should just hold the city side of the river. With most of his fleet gone, Stannis can't get his army over in one go anytime soon.
Get dropping down them trees, lads, we need more rafts!
And it wouldn't be prudent to drip feed them into the lion's jaws. By simply showing up on the other side of the river, Tywin would probably force Stannis to withdraw and consolidate his position. It's not curtains for Stannis overall, and Tywin's far from escaped the menace's wrath. But it's curtains for this specific battle, and Tywin's bought himself a little time. The problem is those ifs, and while Tom doesn't think they are that big a concern, I think they are still worthwhile consideration. Firstly, while the wiki will say Tywin had 20,000 men, this seems like it's potentially an oversight, because it's just sort of impossible. That's his force at the start of the War of the Five Kings. He's taken several whoopings since then, and been noted to have suffered heavy losses in the Riverlands. I think it's extremely generous to suggest he's got even 15k worth of that force left. Then there's getting his host to King's Landing all the way from where he was holding up in the Riverlands on time. It's quite the trek, and going to be rather tiring, and they certainly wouldn't arrive in the same good time that they did with the Tyrells. And even then, if he can get there in time, there's the mental and physical state of his host upon arrival. Don't forget, they've been losing. And no, Tywin fanboys, the old lion isn't fainting at any of the fords in some grand deception against Stannis. He's not fucking Palpatine. He's been having his ass kicked, plain and simple. By Edmure of all people. Which means the morale of his army will already be about as low as can be. Add a 300 or so mile forced march to King's Landing, and you're going to have a Battle of Hastings situation on your hands, where one army is fresh and eager, and the other is fucking knackered, demoralized, and potentially in no state to fight. With these factors considered, even the best move of holding the other side of the river is little more than a bluff. If Stannis calls it and quickly loads a few thousand of his most formidable knights onto his remaining 30 to 40 warships and smashes into Tywin's exhausted, war-weary forces, they might just break. Maybe, maybe not. Probably maybe not, but it's worth considering. I think it's overlooked just how crucial a role Mace played in the Lion's victory. It's his barges that allow the Lannister relief force to arrive on time and in a fit enough state to fight. and it's his army that does the heavy lifting of rear-ending Stannis.
Oh, I bet that was one rear ending the Knight of Flowers really enjoyed giving.
How classy of you. If Stannis had some semblance of a scouting force up the Blackwater, then if Tywin and Mace had showed up just a bit earlier or later, Stannis would have been able to withdraw without disaster, or would have already taken the city. Remember, Stannis' men were all mounted, whilst the Tyrells and Lannisters were not even close to having that amount of horses. The fact the Tyrell/Lannister host shows up at the precise moment when Stannis' army is most vulnerable is an accident so perfect, you could not recreate it.
Oh, it's no accident or twist of fate. It's Tyrion's investment in those clansmen, and it paid absolute dividends and then some.
Look, Tom, I know you like the Lions, but even though Stannis loses, it's not a Lannister victory. It's a Tyrell one. And it's that very point there that causes me to throw my Stannis Simpish to the wind and say that yes, the Battle of the Blackwater was a huge fucking mistake and a grave miscalculation on the part of the Mannis. No, Tom, I'm not mad, and I'm not a non-Mannis simping clone. I'm sorry, my king, but it's the only way you'll learn. For Stannis, this battle is doomed from the start, and it's not in the military aspects. That was his game to win. But as always, when the Lions are involved, it's in the political elements before, after, and outside of the battle. Firstly, Tyrion hijacks Cersei's plan, making the wise decision to send Tommen away from the city to Rosby before the attack. That's a serious fucking headache for Stannis, as the Lannisters still have a quote, legitimate unquote, heir to rally people around. This is compounded by the fact that Stannis himself, at this point in time, has very little in the way of political and public support. His men respect and support him, but the bulk of his army is filled with a bunch of people who were ready to fight against him barely a month ago. And look at how they responded when Renly's bloody ghost appeared. And somehow, I'm not sure the people of King's Landing, despite despising the Lions, would have warmed up to Stannis either, since he's just attacked their city. Then we have these rotten, flowery fuckers! The Tyrells made it clear they weren't on Stannis' side when they sided with Renly. They made it even more clear they weren't on his side when they pissed off back home post Renly's death. And they made it about as clear as could possibly be they weren't on his side when they imprisoned Stannis' envoy Parman Crane, whom he sends to secure their allegiance. Fair's fair, the Tyrells had previously declared war on the Lannisters when they backed Renly. So Stannis isn't a total fucking moron for assuming they'd sit it out. But come on, my king! They've made two things clear. By siding with Renly, they are not your friend. By siding with Renly, they wanted more power! Combine this with Stannis' rather well-known views on the law. Did the one true king really expect the Tyrells to sit around twiddling their thumbs until Daddy Stannis was ready to come and punish them? All while on the other side of the game board sits a faction they have not yet exchanged direct hostilities with, and can also give them everything Renly had promised. Look, my king, I do not mean to tear you a new one, but this is for your own good. Are you blind? But even after this lack of foresight, there's an even greater problem at the root of this battle. What was Stannis' plan after he'd taken the city?
Did the one true king think that there was some Highlander shenanigans at play? Like if he took Joffrey's head and sat in the sharp chair that somehow he would absorb Joffrey's powers and everyone would just bend the knee?
Shut the fuck up, Tom! No! Obviously, he would have been planning to use the throne as a badge of legitimacy and as a hub to consolidate his power, before taking back to the field. But the problem is, what was there to consolidate beyond the already wobbly loyalty of the Stormlands? He doesn't have any meaningful allies to help secure his rulership, no matter what chair he's sitting on. The Ironborn are rebelling. Dawn in the Vale doesn't give a shit, and the Reach, even before throwing in with the Lions, those treasonous flowery fucks, have made it clear they won't come to heel. The best Stannis has got is an ally of convenience in the North and the Riverlands, and even then that's dependent on them sharing a mutual enemy. They have no plans of coming back into the fold as they want their independence. He doesn't have the love of the small folk, and no fucking way are the Faith going to back him with Mel by his side. Getting all the kingdoms back under boot, and it likely will be under boot at first, without at least one significant ally, is a task beyond even the might of the Manus, since he's got no fire-breathing cheat codes like that sister fucker Aegon. He's also inheriting a lot of headaches, considering food and supplies were not exactly abundant before he took the city, and I have a sneaking suspicion it isn't going to start coming up from the Rose Road. That's an awful lot of heavy lifting his fleet was going to have to do, and that's in a pre-nuked state. This is the crux of why it's a doomed mistake. Blackwater is Stannis sprinting to the finish line of an egg and spoon race without the egg in his spoon. He has neither the hearts nor the swords, two things he needs in bulk to enforce his claim. The legitimacy of the crown and throne look fantastic on paper, but ultimately, despite it being a relatively sensible gamble on the military front, and a damn fine display of Stannis as a military commander, it's Stannis' poorest moment as a king. His worst moment of vanity, entitlement, and impulsiveness. Something actually personified in the battle itself by his Admiral Imri. If you want to put it crudely, Stannis fights this battle and throws away lives just for the privilege of climbing all those steps and forcing himself into a cold iron chair, rather than fighting to earn the allegiance that would have had him lifted onto it. In other words, this battle is him doing things backwards. Carts and horses. Davos. And that's our take. Ooh, I can't wait for the armchair generals to start tearing this video a new one, Tom. At least the Manus appreciated my brutal honesty. Apparently, because of it, they're going to have a bonfire with me as the guest of honor. Exciting, eh?